Paul Hillegonds, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Happy to be with you, Tom. Thank you for asking me to participate.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've been a wonderful mentor, frankly, for me for years, and especially when I was at Cornerstone and on my board for a while. And I always appreciated our conversations and continue to appreciate them, although they're less frequent nowadays. And I just love to start there, maybe with my guess is mentoring is important to you, helping people is important to you. So talk a little bit about that for yourself and why it is.
I do think that we all have experiences to share, and hopefully some wisdom that has come from experience. But I failed a couple of retirements. And I think in part it's because I enjoy working with younger generations. I've done formal mentoring at the Gerald Ford School at the University of Michigan of graduate students, which is always so fulfilling. I learn as much as I think I impart, and that is what mentoring to me is about. It's not only sharing my own experiences, but understanding where people who I'm working with are coming from, what their own aspirations are, and if there's one common thread in all the conversations that I have is that usually people are looking for advice on how to achieve a specific goal. And my advice always is be open to opportunity. Understand that you can't control everything, that roadmaps often aren't the final journey, that if you're open to opportunity, your life will be exciting and I believe fulfilling.
Well, it strikes me that there's a distinction between mentoring and coaching, and at least I always think about it. And mentoring sort of has this level or status where the person being mentored usually is younger, less experienced than the mentor, and whereas coaching is more of a conversation and dialogue between equals. And I think in part of your discussion there, what I heard is more of a coaching almost, because you say you walk away, getting as much out of it as the other person.
Actually, I think it is more mentoring, because usually I've worked with younger individuals. But when I say I get as much out of it, as you grow older, sometimes you can become more set in your ways, more jaded about the world. And I love the idealism and energy that I receive back when I am mentoring. And I usually come away from a mentoring experience excited about the future of the mentee, because I see so much to offer. I'm an optimist by nature, but I really am optimistic about the future in spite of all the challenges we face because of the idealism and energy of so many young people.
I love that. I love that. Well, when you fail this next retirement, Paul, you can come and join me and the Phoenix Performance Partners team, and continue that work. Continue to coach and mentor and help people. What gives you that optimism? Especially, hopefully, we're at the sort of tail end of COVID, but politically the world is so divided. You've got a very impressive background in politics, so you're pretty intimately familiar with that. What does give you optimism for the future?
Well, partly it is my own religious faith, which has been important in my life, but it's also the experience I've had. I think I've had 5 different so-called careers that have always been uplifting because of the people I've worked with. It's interesting, going back to my first job in Washington, D.C., working for a congressman on a congressional staff. We still get together as a staff after some, almost 50 years when I started, and enjoy each other's company and keep in touch today. And I can say that about every step of my journey. The people have been important, but I find that at least in my experience, people working together on shared goals, having a common vision so often, the culture with which I've worked over time really does give me hope for the future, because in every case, it's been a problem-solving culture. It's been a group of people who've wanted to leave the place where they've worked and the world they work in better than what they found it. And I still think, in spite of all the challenges we face, that spirit is alive. It's certainly challenged in our polarized political environment and in many ways in our social environment today. But that has always been the case in my experience too. There have been external challenges, and people who can work together and have a common problem-solving agenda, in the end, can make a difference for good.
Yeah, so there's a huge element of faith for you, your faith life, this common vision that people are working towards and working to make happen. And when you can do that, it creates a powerful culture, which obviously is one of our favorite words. The name of this podcast is Culture Eats Everything. You know, that Peter Drucker talked about how culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we actually think it's much bigger than that, that culture eats everything. So maybe talk about that for a little bit. What does culture mean to you, and how do you go about creating one where people can live and be their best?
I believe culture does trump everything else too. And it really, my belief was shaped in my first leadership experience when I was elected minority leader of the Republican caucus in Lansing. It was a caucus that had been a minority for over 20 years. And it was a group of men and women who wanted to make a difference for good, but because our minority caucus couldn't control the agenda of the policy agenda, over time, it had become a caucus that was very negative. I talked about it as a culture of minority mentality, where what united us was simply opposing whatever the majority put forth. And after a while, that culture, I think, contributed to our staying in the minority. We didn't stand for anything. And when we did talk about issues that we wanted to pursue, often we divided among each other. So when I became leader, I realized that the most important thing we could do was to work on shedding our minority mentality. And what we did together was to create a number of work groups or task forces focused on specific policy issues, be it economic vitality, environmental health. We had a task force on childcare, institutional reform. But what was so important to changing that culture was it wasn't top down. I didn't appoint people to those work groups. I asked the members of our caucus to sign up for issues that they cared about. They created the issues they wanted to work on and volunteered with their passion to pursue potential solutions, or at least progress on those issues. And what happened over time is that we had a very diverse group of men and women who didn't always agree on things, coming together around issues and producing some very positive reports. And lo and behold, within 3 years, I would say, the caucus members started to participate in the overall legislative process in a constructive way. They couldn't set the agenda, but they could contribute their ideas to enriching the agenda that had been set. And I firmly believe that in time, it took 6 years, the reason our Republican minority finally became a majority, a co-majority actually, we shared power in that first session where we could help set the agenda. I believe we reached that goal because we shed our minority mentality. We changed our culture. And when we did finally participate in setting the agenda, we had something positive to offer. It was my lesson in how important culture is to getting things done. It was also a lesson to me on leadership, of understanding the importance of empowering others to pursue their passions, to not be uncomfortable with diverse ideas and experiences, and allow all of that to come together in a positive way.
And how do you do that? You know, how do you empower people to ignite their own passion?
Well, you do it first of all with humility. You make it clear as a leader that while you as a leader have your own vision and ideas, what's more important is shared vision and the contribution of ideas from everyone. It really, in this example, was a case of structuring the kind of idea generation where participants honestly were allowed and in fact invited to share their passions, to pursue what they thought was important, and to take risk in doing that. I knew that some of the ideas I myself might be uncomfortable with, and I was concerned that the diversity of our members might cause some of these work groups to blow up. But what happened was members, as they got to know each other better, to build trust, found it easier to reach consensus even when they disagreed with each other. And that was so important in how we ended up working with the majority party.
Wow. So starting with allowing people to, well, starting with humility is always a great reminder, always a great leadership tool that a lot of folks don't have, or they forget to pull out of their tool belt maybe. But then making sure that there's a shared vision, a shared future that we're all working towards. Because if we don't have a shared destination, then we're all going to go in different directions.
Shared vision, but also trust in and appreciation of diverse ideas. Yes, shared vision is important. And the starting question for all of these work groups, but for the whole group, was, how do we want to leave the state after our service? What do we aspire to be collectively as a state? And what are our ideas for reaching that better condition? So shared vision, but then trust in diversity, that people will have different ideas about how to get there, to how to improve our condition, and to build over time respect for each other's differences as we work towards common ideas as a consensus. I've always been a believer that compromise is not a bad thing. You need to start out with foundational vision and goals, but recognize that we all can't get our way. We have to understand how to build consensus by compromise.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's not a dirty word. It's actually a way of getting things done.
Yes, it is.
Um, definitely don't want to talk about, politics in and of itself, but my business partner, Brad, contends that on all sides, there's not a lot of leadership. There's not a lot of future out there. It's mostly, we should do this or we shouldn't do that, or we should, it's all tactical in nature, which is what leaves people sort of fighting because there's no shared future out there for folks to work towards. I'm just curious what you think about that, and then maybe take it to what advice would you have for the leaders of today, the political leaders of today?
Uh, um, yeah, tough question. I do think we've broken down more as a society into tribes that in our world of social media can be reinforced in our viewpoints by the media we select to follow. In the end, I think the important thing for a political leader is to always work on fostering relationships in the political realm across party lines, but within parties, because parties are divided too. Those divisions tend to go away as people get to know each other on a personal level better. I do think that in the state of Michigan, at least, term limits has made that a greater challenge because people don't have as much time to work together. But there are steps you can take to build relationships across party lines, and to ask the question as leaders of your caucuses, of your membership, how do you want to leave the state? You are a steward of the state in a real sense. What is it you aspire the state to be, your community to be? And when people start talking about their aspirations for their children, their grandchildren, for their communities, for their state, some of those differences tend to melt away. But you can't really have those conversations by just debating on a House floor. You need to work together in smaller groups. It is why my counsel to, I'm a dinosaur, but leaders now 25, 30 years later, I say you ought to consider when you assign seats to members, don't have the two parties divided on the House floor. Have Democrats and Republicans sitting together, getting to know each other. And when you start a new term, as a majority, if you are a majority, just don't start working on your agenda. Go out and travel the state on a bipartisan basis and listen to what people are concerned about and work on developing some common agendas. This council comes from the best 2 years of the 18 I spent in the State House. And that was when the voters gave us an evenly divided House, 55 Democrats, 55 Republicans. And we had to figure out how to govern the House. And we ended up having co-speakers of the House, co-chairs of committees, and we couldn't do anything without bipartisan support. But we alternated who would preside on the House floor every other month, who would preside in a committee every other month. But the interesting thing that developed very quickly is that instead of worrying about who is in charge a particular month, both co-chairs and co-speakers started talking together about what are the agendas we want to work on together. And it was my lesson in letting go of this feeling that you have to control everything, and understanding that if you're willing to share problem solving, you're going to accomplish a whole lot more and probably sustain whatever policy ideas are enacted into law, probably sustain them over a longer period of time. So, I think it starts with personal relationships, but it also starts with a very concerted effort to share influence, to empower each other towards common problem solving.
They strike me as sort of timeless leadership principles, that those are, doesn't matter if that was 500 years ago or 500 years from now, that it all starts with just human relationships. I love that. It's so brilliant, so simple. The best ideas are so elegant, right? To have people sit together and listen to, that way they can listen to each other.
It's at a time when hate talk, hate speech tends to come more easily. It's hard to hate someone you're getting to know. If you take the time to get to know those who maybe come from very different places, philosophically, life experience, some wonderful bonds can develop. Some of my longest friendships and deepest friendships from the time I spent in the legislature are from relationships that developed across a bargaining table with people of the other party. And we still enjoy not only talking about the past, but I'm part of a bipartisan consensus policy group right now of former legislators of both parties who just want to talk about and offer up ideas about how we solve problems together.
I love it. I love it. Well, the world, the United States needs more of that. It reminds me, there's a great quote from Corey Anthony. He's the senior VP of, I think, human resources and diversity at AT&T. And he had a great discussion with some other folks. And I sort of copied down a lot of what he said. And I love to talk about it. He says, avoid becoming the very thing you are fighting against, which is intolerance. Yeah. It's a paradox that happens when people insulate themselves and block out others whose beliefs are radically different from their own. We must avoid binary thinking, step outside of your echo chamber, quit consuming information and perspectives from sources that already think, feel, and behave like you do. That is toxic.
Yes, yeah. And it's applicable to, I've talked about political experience, but one of the adventures in my own journey I had was working with a large corporation, DTE Energy. The first year I was there, the company was having a tough time financially, and the leadership, the CEO and executive team, handed down some mandates to the entire company. Each division had to achieve X number of dollars of savings, and however you could do it, laying off employees, maybe some short-term cost cutting that didn't make sense long-term. We had to meet those goals. It was a very painful experience, and it was very hard on the company. It hurt morale. Well, about 4 years later, after the 2008 financial meltdown, we faced a similar crisis. And the same leadership, having learned from 4 years previous, brought the senior leaders together, but this went through the entire company, saying, we are in crisis, but we are not going to lay off anyone. We are going to ask everyone in this company to do participatory problem solving on how together we can weather this crisis. And the problem solving that started to occur at every level was so much more constructive, longer term focused. Morale was amazing. and led to a quick turnaround of the company financially. It was a lesson in even a company with thousands of employees, leadership by empowering all those who are part of the organization can result in a much more positive culture and many more positive results.
Wow, that's such a great and powerful story, especially since it was the same people,
Yeah, same people who had learned
to adopt those new mindsets and to use them. And we know so much more about the brain now, and the brain science that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because you're not triggering people's fears, right? Do this mandate, which actually tends to shut down our prefrontal cortex and our ability to think. You're actually empowering a future. You're being real about the reality of today, but you're saying, hey, this is a future we need to get to together. And so, help us think of how to get there. And that actually helps people to think more clearly, because they're a part of, as you said, they're empowered to come up with solutions.
Yeah, it was a great lesson in leadership and in culture building, because again, it really starts with culture. And the lesson there was how quickly you can make culture change with the right values, the right principles of how you're going to go forward.
So we've only got a couple minutes left, Paul. Maybe you could talk to young leaders out there. Kind of we'll end with where we started, which is around mentoring, which I know you love, and helping young people. You love the optimism that's out there. For folks who are maybe younger, who want to become a CEO someday, or they want to become a leader of significance, what would you tell them to focus their energies on?
Well, it's kind of passe, I guess, common advice, but it's less. Certainly, you have to have goals, and it helps to have an idea of where you think you want to go, but be prepared to make adjustments in those plans, and start with following your own passions. Do what you enjoy doing more than is what I'm doing going to help me reach the next step. When you enjoy what you're doing and you thrive in what you're doing, it usually opens more doors of opportunity as a next step. And it is about always finding ways to collaborate, to partner with others. We're in a world today where we understand, I think, more than ever, the importance of team problem solving. And for young people who are young leaders, really encouraging that kind of team problem solving usually will achieve better results, rather than you trying to control how you're going to achieve a particular goal. Shared problem solving usually achieves success a lot faster than top-down goal setting and telling teams how to get there. So I do think, though, starting with what do you really care about? What are your own values? How do you want to see those values put to work? What are you excited about going to work on every day is a huge starting point. If you're looking at a particular compensation level or benefits, and not thinking about, am I fulfilled in what I'm doing? It's likely not going to be a very happy journey. So and while that seems so easy to say from someone who has maybe enjoyed success over the years, I've found that can be hard sometimes. It's when you're young and ambitious, as I hope people are. I want people to be ambitious, but learning that you can't control every step of the way is hard to accept sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always like to think about it. Do you want to be effective or do you want to be right?
Yeah, well said.
And I think for me, that was a huge problem I had, frankly, even going back to my days with you. I know initially I was very sort of almost defensive around what we were doing, and I wanted to control things in many ways, and I was not open to the collaboration as much as I should have been, because I had all these amazingly talented, amazingly accomplished people that had I to do it over again, I could have used a much more proactively, much more productively. But my own sort of fears or whatever got in the way of me doing that. And I think it's such a valuable lesson for young people out there is, just stop and think. Am I more focused on being right here, or am I how do I shift into be more effective? And collaboration is almost always the solution if you do it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Paul, what book would you recommend? I always like to close with getting more books out into the world.
Well, I earlier this summer, actually, I read two books at the same time concurrently because they just seem to work together. And as I learned, the two authors happen to be good friends, but Robert Putnam and his co-author, Shayla Romney Garrett, wrote the book, The Upswing. And then the subtitle is How America Came Together a Century Ago and How We Can Do It Again. And it's very database, but it goes back to the early 20th century when it was very much an I society, and how it evolved into a we society, where the progressive movement, schooling, K-12 schooling for kids, but also progressive changes in taxation and joining more civic organizations evolved and actually peaked around the World War II era. And we have gradually, unfortunately, declined in more of an I society again, and a very divided society. But the message of this book is we can return to a we society. So last chapter talks about, well, what does it take? And the reminder is the early 20th century movement didn't start with government. It started with concerned individuals who started working together at the local level and gradually changing a national culture. That leads to the second book. Jonathan Sacks, who is the late chief rabbi in Great Britain, wrote a book recently, Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. The two titles attracted me, but his message is, again, the common good starts with morality and people building relationships. And I just think, the database book by Robert Putnam, the more really theological message by Jonathan Sacks fit so well together, and I recommend both books.
And there it is again, that relationships, it's everything, right?
Yes, yeah. But again, the two books reinforce the optimism I have. Maybe the pandemic, certainly I can speak personally, it's been a reminder to me and friends of how important family and time with relationships is so important. I think there is, in spite of all the fighting going on today politically, there is a desire by so many Americans to come together and start talking about how do we go forward together, as opposed to what do I want with my tribe.
Yeah. The vast majority of Americans, I think, fall into that category. Vast majority of world citizens, I think, fall into that category, right? They just don't happen to have the megaphones that some of these yahoos do, and I mean that on all sides.
Well, yeah, but both authors remind us that it starts with our own behavior and how we treat relationships, and that gives me hope.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you for the time and for the wonderful insights. So much to discover here. I wish we had another 2 hours to discuss morality and relationships and culture and leadership and all the stuff that is so fun to talk about. But we just thank you for your wisdom today, and frankly, for your years of service to many amazing organizations, both civic and nonprofit and for-profit. Just a huge blessing to the Michigan community. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks, Tom, and thank you for what you're doing. You've had your own interesting journey, and I know you're finding fulfillment in what you're doing, and what you're doing is so important. Focus on culture building. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a real blessing. Frankly, it's we don't say this too often because it's not about the religion, if you will, but it is a ministry. It feels like an opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about. It's an opportunity to build relationships, and I'll never forget. This is the fun of this podcast, is I can do whatever I want. We were ending it, now we're still going. We had some folks that just did not like each other. It's a long story. Two cultures, two organizations coming together. And by the end of the first day of working with them, they left in tears. And it goes back to what you said, tears, good tears, like they had built this whole new relationship with each other. And it came back to some really simple ideas, that they were both fathers. They both had, powerful relationships in their lives. They both cared about making a difference in the world. And when they just spent some time getting to know each other as human beings, they were able to set all the other stuff, all the other garbage, all the other sort of petty stuff aside. And to me, that's our secret, frankly, is, if you want to build a strong culture, it's all about the relationships. And we just help to supercharge that.
I'm sorry we're going over, but you remind me, when the voters gave the House an evenly divided partisan split, the leader to be on the Democratic side and I spent a couple of months trying to figure out how we could find a traitor from the other side to allow us to become a majority. And it was very intense, a partisan fight. A lobbyist finally came to each of us separately and said, you don't know each other that well. You need to sit down and get to know each other. And we met at a bar, just the two of us, and we started talking about family, about shared goals, our aspirations, not personally, but for the state. And after that meeting, that began a series of conversations which led to how we were going to share leadership together. But it started with just sitting down and getting to know each other better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Paul, again. Appreciate the time and all you've done and will continue to do in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Great to see you. Thanks.
Well, that was a wonderful conversation with Paul. And I just wanted to take a minute to let you know, as listeners, why we're doing this. It's not get rich quick scheme, because we're not, but really we started this because we want to help more leaders out there, especially young leaders who are looking to the future and want to become a CEO maybe someday, or a school superintendent someday, or a nonprofit executive director someday, and could really benefit from just hearing from real people, real leaders talking about the challenges they face, hearing their advice, so that we don't have this idea that, CEOs or school superintendents are somehow superheroes, and they were born with some sort of magic dust. We want to eliminate that really a lot of them are hardworking. They've worked their whole life really hard. They've sought opportunities, as Paul just talked about. They've gone through the open doors. They've changed their mindset. They've grown. They've improved. None of that stuff is easy, but they're not some sort of mystical creature either. That it's accessible for all of us. And so, hopefully, these episodes are helpful for you. If you found them helpful, we'd love for you to click the subscribe button below. Maybe leave a comment for us. That would be fantastic. Thanks so much for listening and have a great week.